Before Uzi and Cardi, before Lil Baby and Gunna, before Peanut Butter and Jelly, we had Young Thug and Rich Homie Quan. 10 years ago in 2014, these two Atlanta legends came together to form Rich Gang, one of the most iconic and influential hip-hop duos of all time. Back then, Rich Gang was at the height of hip-hop success, dropping chart-topping hits like Lifestyle, releasing classic mixtapes like The Tour, and introducing mainstream hip-hop to a unique, unprecedented style of innovative vocal deliveries and melodic experimentation, which ultimately carved a lane for artists like Lil Baby, Lil Uzi, Gunna, and more to become the next generation of hip-hop superstars. The duo was so good that Gucci Mane even offered them $1 million to get back in the studio and record a new album together in 2018. But in 2024, it doesn't look like we'll ever hear new music from Rich Gang again. Young Thug is in jail on a RICO charge, and if he's found guilty, he could be facing anywhere from 10 to 40 years in prison. As for Rich Homie Quan, between snitching allegations and poor performing music, he's lost almost all his popularity. His last song on the Billboard charts was from 2015. Almost 10 years ago. But even if Young Thug gets out of jail and Rich Homie Quan regains his mainstream success, it's hard to see the rappers ever giving us another Rich Gang project. While the two rappers seemed like brothers in 2014, it wouldn't be long before they started dissing each other. And we'd later find out that their beef goes way beyond just the music. But what really happened between 2014 and 2015 that caused the rappers to have a falling out? Well, let's dive into it. It all started in 2013. Rich Homie Quan was breaking into the mainstream with his hits like Type of Way and My Hitter. At this point, he was a much bigger artist than Young Thug. Thug was signed to Gucci Mane's label at the time, and he was catching a small buzz within Atlanta from his early mixtapes. But then Gucci Mane was sent to prison, and Thug had to find a new label if he wanted to break into a new level of mainstream success. He dropped his early hits Stoner and Danny Glover, which introduced vocal deliveries and flows that no one in music had used before. He sounded like a hybrid of Lil Wayne, Future, and a lot of psychedelics. I don't like using profanity, but the young fucker will touch you. This is when he caught the attention of hip-hop mogul Birdman. If you don't know who Birdman is, he started the label Cash Money and blew up the biggest rappers in the world like Lil Wayne, Nicki Minaj, and Drake. But at this point, Birdman's biggest superstars like Lil Wayne and Tyga were leaving his label due to money issues. So Birdman needed a new protege to maintain his relevance within the next generation of hip-hop. This is when he linked up with Young Thug and started Rich Gang. Birdman helped Thug get features from massive artists like Nicki Minaj, Tyga, and even some unreleased music with Drake and Lil Wayne. But the moment that Young Thug's career truly went to the next level was when him and Birdman recorded the song Lifestyle. At first, the song just featured a verse and a hook from Thug and some legendary ad-libs from Birdman.
Just in the middle of this ocean, Pacific that is. You understand me? Yeah. I do this for Miss Gladys, boy.
But the song needed a second verse, and this is when Rich Homie Quan came into the picture. Birdman went to one of Rich Homie Quan's shows in Miami, and after the show, the two went to the studio where Birdman played him Lifestyle. Rich Homie Quan hopped on the song right away. He claims it took him only 20 minutes to record his verse.
When we put together Lifestyle, Thug and I even liked the song. I went to the studio with Bird, and Lifestyle was the first song he played for me. I did my verse in like 20 minutes.
And Rich Homie Quan was successful before Lifestyle, but after Lifestyle, it launched both him and Young Thug into a whole other stratosphere of success. The song peaked in the top 20 of the Hot 100, and to this day it has more than 600 million views on YouTube. Rich Homie Quan claims that at the time, it wasn't just Birdman that brought him and Young Thug together, but they were actually friends in real life, and it definitely seemed like it. Once Lifestyle became a success, Rich Homie Quan and Young Thug were living in the same condo building and were constantly recording music together. In around November of 2014, the two announced that they'd be going on a Rich Gang tour, and they even dropped a mixtape called The Tour Volume 1. Now remember, at the time, Rich Homie Quan was still the bigger artist, as he had multiple chart-topping hits and albums. He claims that because he was the bigger artist, when they go out to do shows, he was getting paid more than Thug would. But even though Young Thug wasn't as big as Rich Homie Quan, he was catching up quick. He went completely against the grain of what a traditional rapper looked and sounded like. He substituted bars and lyrics for infectious melodic flows that birthed what we now know as mumble rap. And while Young Thug was definitely known as a thug, early in his career, people were extremely confused by his slang, fashion choices, and even his sexuality. He would call his friends babe, he called Rich Homie Quan his hubby.
Young Thug calls you hubby.
You say Young Thug called me hubby.
Explain what that means.
It's nothing but a figure of speech.
And he was constantly seen wearing dresses, even on his album covers. Because of how much of a polarizing enigma Young Thug was compared to the typical rapper in 2014, he really stood out and his popularity grew astronomically. By the beginning of 2015, he was in a full-out beef with his idol Lil Wayne.
If y'all ever have Rich Gang or whoever it is in this motherfucker, y'all let them know I said fuck. And stop listening to songs of niggas that pose naked on their motherfucking album.
I understand that Lil Wayne is frustrated about his career. I feel him on that, but this is my idol. This is a person that I look up to. Ha ha.
And in a court indictment, it's alleged that Young Thug and Birdman were involved in orchestrating a shooting of Lil Wayne's tour bus, and Young Thug's tour manager, Jimmy Winfrey, had been identified as the gunman. Now around the same time, rumors circulated that Rich Gang was splitting up, and Rich Homie Quan and Young Thug were no longer getting along. On February 26, 2015, Rich Homie Quan did an interview at the Hot 107.9 radio station, and in the interview he said he was stepping away from Rich Gang because people wanted more solo music from him.
I've stepped away from the Rich Gang a little bit just to get back to Quan. People want Quan back, man.
Right after that, in March of 2015, Young Thug was performing with Travis Scott, and on stage, he called Rich Homie Quan, Bitch Homie Quan.
So you and Young Thug are fine, because they were saying in reports that he was saying something about you at a concert.
Yeah, he called me Bitch Homie Quan.
And from there, it was all over. The two would continue to take shots at each other during their concerts. Rich Homie Quan called Young Thug a homosexual on stage. Young Thug said fuck Rich Homie Quan before he performed Lifestyle. And the weirdest part of all this is we never got a true answer from either of them as to why Rich Gang separated.
I never said I wasn't gonna do the Rich Gang thing. I've stepped away from the Rich Gang a little bit. Rich Gang, my family, like Bird, that's my uncle. Like,
we clearly know, for example, why Young Thug was beefing with Lil Wayne. He was replacing Lil Wayne as Birdman's protege, and Lil Wayne threatened to sue him when he tried to name his album The Carter 6. But with Thug and Rich Homie, neither of them ever explained why they were beefing. Even years later in interviews, Rich Homie would always give vague answers as to why Rich Gang separated. But fast forward to 2022, and we might have a little bit of clarity on the situation. See, when Young Thug got locked up, Rich Homie Quan's name was on the witness list. Many people were confused by this and wondered why Rich Homie Quan was even involved in the trial. A few months later, an audio recording leaked of Rich Homie Quan talking to law enforcement about Young Thug, and what he said actually may clear up a lot as to why the two had split up back in 2015. Now stick with me for a minute because it might get a little hard to follow. So back in 2014, when Rich Homie Quan and Young Thug were still cool, Rich Homie Quan had a manager by the name of Donovan Thomas, who also went by Big Nut. There was actually footage of Young Thug and Big Nut on Birdman's yacht together, and Young Thug said that Nut was one of the biggest bloods in America. Big Nut was part of the Inglewood family blood gang, and they were rivals to the Sex Money Murder Gang. At the time, Young Thug was in communication with Kyle Ory, who was the leader of the Sex Money Murder Gang. Big Nut was rumored to have snitched on members of the Sex Money Murder Gang, and on January 11th, 2015, he was murdered in an Atlanta barbershop. Prosecutors in Young Thug's case think that Young Thug was behind the murder. They claim that his gang, YSL, orchestrated the entire thing. There's even pictures on Reddit of the word slat allegedly spray painted on Big Nut's grave. If you didn't know, slat was a common term used by Young Thug and his YSL record label. So after Young Thug got locked up in 2022, Rich Homie Quan spoke to law enforcement about the murder and provided details about the incident and the people involved.
Why did you suspect Young Thug? Was it because people told you, or did you have some beef with Young Thug at the time?
I ain't had no beef, bro. That shit was deeper than rap, man. I really feel as if they was jealous of the relationship.
Now remember, Rich Homie Quan and Young Thug used to live in the same condo building, but after the passing of Big Nut, Rich Homie Quan claims that Young Thug moved to Miami, and him and Rich Homie stopped contacting each other. Also remember that Big Nut died in January of 2015. By February of 2015, Rich Homie Quan gets on the radio and says he's no longer part of Rich Gang. And by March of 2015, Young Thug was yelling Bitch Homie Quan at his shows. So if you break it down, the timeline of Rich Homie Quan and Young Thug's beef lines up logically with the passing of Rich Homie Quan's manager. They dropped music together all the way up until the beginning of 2015 when Big Nut gets shot. Then suddenly, Rich Homie Quan talks about leaving Rich Gang, and Young Thug starts dissing him at his shows. It's important to remember that this is all speculation, and besides the recording of Rich Homie Quan talking to law enforcement, there's been no mention from him or Thug that they started beefing over gang-related events. As far as we know, the whole beef could have simply stemmed from egos and petty disses, but regardless of what started the beef, it's unfortunate unfortunate that things played out the way they did. Rich Homie Quan was never able to attain the same level of mainstream success that he saw with Rich Gang, and even though Young Thug went on to have an extremely successful career, if he's found guilty of all the charges he's facing, then all that success really means nothing. In recent years, both artists claim there's no hard feelings against one another. Young Thug said he forgives Rich Homie, but that they won't ever go back to being as cool as they were during the Rich Gang days. As for Rich Homie Quan, he said that Rich Gang was a milestone. They recorded great music and that there's nothing to be disappointed about. Everyone in that situation came away better, stronger, smarter, and it was good while it lasted. And being 18 years old at the peak of the Rich Gang era, I could definitely say it was great while it lasted. It's sad to see such a fun era of hip-hop be destroyed in such a strange way, over some easily avoidable circumstances and some big egos. If they never split up, who knows what Rich Gang would have evolved into, or where Young Thug and Rich Homie Quan's careers would have went if they kept working with each other. But everything happens for a reason, and if your reason for watching this is to hear stories of your favorite rappers, then I really appreciate it if you'd hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more.